Alright, hello and welcome to the next video. In this video we're going to learn all about modules. So our goal is to actually learn how we can import and export different things in Node.js. However, I won't be just teaching you the rules. I also want to show you some examples because I really believe that as humans learn best from past experiences, and this example is going to be one of such things. So in this example we're going to write a small application without using any modules at first, and then you'll see how it turns up to be a bit too messy at the end. So then we're going to extract 3 separate pieces from that application that will end up being 3 separate modules, and then we're simply going to use those 3 modules in our main app.js file, and then you will see how it improves things a lot. So if you don't know much about modules, maybe even the reason why you should modularize your code, this video should really help you to both understand why it is a good practice as well as how you can do it in Node.js. So without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy this video. So we're going to cover pretty much the use of modules, exports and require that you have seen in the previous video. And one good question is perhaps what is a module anyway? So you can think of a module as of a separate unit of code that you can have in your project, and you're able to use that module whenever you want and whenever you need it. However, that module shouldn't really accidentally break your code and impact your other modules in any sort of way. So by default it's protected, and you only expose and use the different modules that you need whenever you need them, and you don't worry about the other modules. So the interesting thing with JavaScript is that it didn't really support modules up until ES6, which is quite recent when you look at the timeline, and compared to that, many other programming languages, for example Java, C#, C++, etc., they all got modules pretty much from the day one. And because of that, when Node.js was created, and that was in 2009, like I said, modules didn't exist. So right now we're in that weird state where we have 2 ways to use modules in JavaScript. So you have one way called common.js that Node.js introduced, because remember, back then JavaScript simply didn't support modules at all. Now back then there were some ways to protect your code and not pollute your global scope and stuff like that, but that wasn't really the best solution. That was just a workaround that people used. So today we have that common.js that Node.js introduced, but we also have those ES6 modules that came with the newest ES6 version. However, because this is a Node.js course and common.js is pretty darn common in Node.js still, we are going to focus all of our attention on common.js in this video. However, if you're watching this in the future, it might be the case that now ES6 modules are heavily used. So if that is the case, I will create a new video on this topic, so please check the top right corner. If you see any cards in there that point to a different video, watch that one instead. Okay guys, so now we can actually write some code and finally understand how these modules work. So to do that we need some examples. So let's pretend that we're building a site for scientists on Earth, and for whatever reason, and they're interested to know how much do the different objects weigh on Earth. Okay, so for example we have step 1, we collect input from our Earth's scientists, and input is a mass of a certain object on Earth. Okay, then 2, we need to actually calculate the weight of said object, and 3, we need to say send them the data back. Okay, so now this might seem like a silly example, and it is, but it will help us to understand how modules work, and we'll have some fun while learning that. Okay, so to do this we need 3 different modules, I would say. We need one module for collecting the inputs, we need one module for calculating the weights, and then we need yet another module for actually sending them the data back. Okay, so let's pretend that for collecting the input we have some function, it is called getInput, for example, and we pass nothing because we just expect some input from them, and then we need to get back a mass of some object. Now we don't want to get the same mass back every time, so we're going to use math.random, okay, and it returns a number between 0 and 1. Well, that's no good for us because we really don't want to receive a 0 as a mass, and 1 is simply not that interesting, so we need to step aside for a moment and build a function that will get us a number between two different values. So we're going to say something like function get random between values, something like this, and then we can say min and max like this, and then this function over here will return math.random once again, but then we need to multiply this by max minus min plus 1 and then plus min, and we also need to floor it, so math.floor all of that. Now you really don't need to understand this, you can just Google it. This simply returns a value between min and max, okay, and that's really so that we can mimic like getting random objects mass back to us. Like this has nothing to do with modules, but later you'll see why this is actually really interesting scenario as the code really starts building up once you actually do some things. So I'm going to minimize this for now because we really aren't interested in this that much, and I'm simply going to return this, and for minimum and maximum maybe we can say like 1 kilograms and like 50 kilograms. And then if I simply quickly test this out, get input, okay, and I simply use it, so get input, and I go to my console, and I go to my terminal and I simply run node app, we should get different values, okay. So let's pretend that this first part over here is done, collect inputs, okay, and we have just now learned that we can actually collect input by simply calling this get input. Of course, in like real world someone will actually send us some data, but because we don't have anyone to send us, we're going to mimic that. So now I'm going to like fold both of these functions and we can move on to the second piece. So we need to calculate the weight of said object. Now I don't want to turn this video into like physics course or anything like that, but simply put, the formula is pretty much like the weight equals mass of an object times gravity acceleration, which is usually denoted by this lowercase a variable over here, and that lowercase a variable is in meters squared per seconds. That's like acceleration. Okay, so what we need to do for this? Well, we said it, our scientists are based on Earth, so we need to use the Earth's gravitational acceleration, and we can store that as a constant because that won't be changing. So I'm going to say constant Earth's gravity equals 9.8. That's like just a fact, I didn't make that up. And then we need to have a function for calculating the weight. So I'm going to say calculate weight, and I want it to be uppercase first letter over here, so calculate weight, and we just need to pass in a mass. As you can tell by this formula over here, we're calculating this uppercase W letter, which stands for weight, okay, and we don't want to pass this acceleration because it is stored over here. So we're simply going to return mass times Earth's gravity. Okay, and then let's say that this second step is done over here as well, and then we need to send them the data back, so we need to create some more functions over here. So let's say we'll just have one function, we'll have send data, and it will expect, say that when we're sending data we need to pack two informations. We need to pack both like the original mass in kilograms, and we also need to pack a weight. So we can say something like object, and then over here we're going to pretend that we're simply going to say console log sending object to scientists, and I just noticed that I misspelled it over here, and we're going to showcase what object are we sending. Okay, and then to test this send data function, we can simply do console.log send data, and we can send the following. So we can say mass, and then we can say maybe like 4, okay, which stands for like 4 kilograms, and then we can say weight 4 times 9.8, I have no idea how much that's, so I'm going to say something like 38. And then we can actually test this out. And as you can see, it is saying to us sending object to scientists, mass of 4 and weight of 38. Okay, so now you might be thinking, okay, I opened this video to learn modules, like what are you doing over here? But like, please bear with me, all will make sense really soon. So now that we have all of these functions, let's actually go through like this entire loop once. Okay, so step 1, we need to get input. So let's say something like const our input that we received equals get input. Okay. Next, once we have this input, we need to calculate the weight. So we're going to say const calculated weight is equal to calculate weight, and then we need to pass this our input, which contains object's mass. Okay, so we pass it over here. So now we have this calculated weight, and then when we're sending object, we actually don't need to do console log twice because we have it over here, so we just need to use it like this. And what we want to do is to say mass equals to our input and weight equals to calculated weight. Okay, and now if I rerun this example, you see that we received a mass of 5 over here, and then we calculated that weight is 49, and we actually send it. So really quickly, I'm just going to do something like this. Okay, and if I rerun this now, it should be a bit nicer. Okay, so you can see the whole flow. We got 1 kilograms, we calculated the weight is 9.8, and we're sending to scientists this. And as you can see, for different values, we get different values over here. So now you might be thinking, okay, like we've done that, but like where are the modules? This is where they come in. So do you see anything wrong with this code over here? The thing I dislike about this code is we both have like the implementational details, and then we actually use that interface to calculate something. So like implementational details, like our interface. Implementational like details, our interface. Implementational details, our interface over here. So with modules, we can actually extract different modules from this code and actually hide these implementational details so that our code in app.js will be like really clean, and we can just like do these 3 steps, and we don't really need to worry about every single moving part in our application at all times. So now let's see how we can modularize this code, and you'll see the benefits that we get by doing that. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, let's turn this collection of input into a separate module. So I'm going to create a new file over here, and I'm going to call it input service.js. So we're going to have this input service, and then let's also create a couple of different files. So for this calculating the actual weight, we're going to create a new file. It's going to be called weight service.js, and for the third piece over here, we're going to call it output service. So output service.js, and then let's start it one by one. So first of all, I'm going to pretty much cut these 2 functions over here, and I'm going to paste them into the input service. And then I'm going to save this file. Now, how can we actually make this line of code work in app.js? Well, we don't have get input in this file anymore, so we need to actually require this input service file. Okay, so I'm going to come above and say require, and then that's a function, and we need to pass it some string as an argument. Now this string over here, depending on what you want to do, you need to pass different things. So there are pretty much like 3 use cases of this require function. So I'm going to do something like this briefly, and then I'm going to delete it. So first use case is you want to require Node's core module. Now Node, when you actually install Node, it ships with quite a few core modules, and maybe you want to import one of those, and I'll show you how. Next, you might want to require a third-party module. Now the npm is the Node's package manager, and we're going to learn all about it in the next video. And like on the web, you can find like billion of node modules, so maybe you want to do that and you do that frequently. Or thirdly, you might want to require a custom made module, and this is what we want to do right now. So these modules over here are something that we wrote ourselves, and they are local to our file over here. So that is this third use case over here. So now if you want to require either a Node core module or a third-party module, what you put over here is just the module's name. So if the module was called computer, for example, you would simply type like computer. Okay, and in the first case, when you require Node's core module, you don't have to install it because that module, for example, is already installed once you installed Node.js. However, if you want to require a third-party module, you do it in the same manner, but you need to use the npm to actually install it, and I'll show you that in the next video. However, if you want to require a custom-made module, then you don't really pass a name, but you need to specify a relative path to that file. So, for example, we want to require this input service. We need to start with dot followed by slash, which means in this current directory over here, as you can see, they're all in the same folder, and then you simply put the file name, so input service. And you can, but you don't need to follow it up with .js. And that's like the first step. So now this app.js is aware that we want to actually like import this input service file that is in the same directory as this app.js file. Okay, and what I can do, I can maybe write over here. So for these core modules, we send, let's say like this, module name. And what I mean by this is what you send over here. For this, we also send the same. And for this third part, we actually send like relative path to file. So now you should probably remember these three rules, and just so I'm sure that you understood me, if we had a scenario in which we had like folder over here and we actually had some file, let's say .js, that we're interested in, well, then we actually specify like, okay, in this directory we have a folder called actual folder, and then we have like file. And if this app.js file was part of some other folders, let's say folder 2, okay, and then yes, okay, so it all okay, so it's automatically did that for me, but like we are now in this app.js file, it is in this folder too, and we want to say load input service. Well, you use this dot to tell the Node.js that you want to go one directory up, and then you can do like slash, and then you see over here what files we have here. So you would import this input service like this, and if you wanted to import this file, you would need to go into this folder and then use file. Okay, so just remember like 2 dots and then slash mean go up one directory, and single dot and slash means in this current directory. Okay, so now I'll revert these changes, delete this, and then we need to load our input service. Okay, alright, so now we did this. And we have this line over here, which calls our get input, that is defined in this input service over here, as you can tell. But will this work out of the box? So if I open my terminal and I try to run the node app.js one more time, you see that we get this get input is not defined. Okay, so this require statement isn't simply like copying this and like replacing this line with the actual code, because if it did that, we would have access to this get input and this line over here wouldn't fail. So in fact, when you use require, you actually need to be more explicit in this. By default, Node.js protects your modules, so outside of this file over here, for example in this one, you're only able to access certain methods that you actually like made sure to be exposed. Okay, so how can you do that? Well, if you remember my previous video, we talked about the fact that in Node.js we have access to something called modules, require, and exports, right? So we can use these three keywords to do exactly that. So there are a couple of different ways you can do this. For example, at the end of this file, you can simply type module.export, and this is an object that will be returned by this function over here. So if we, for example, say, hey, okay, we simply say this, and then we store the contents of this file in some variable. Let's call it input service, and then we simply immediately console.log whatever is stored in this file, in this variable, sorry, input service. We should see this hey string over here. So node app, and we see that modules.exports, that modules is not defined. That's probably because it's actually module.export, so that's my mistake over here. And if I rerun it one more time, we should see that input service actually contains this string hey. So now what you can do is you can pretty much attach anything you want to this. So maybe we want to attach this method. Okay, so let's simply do that. So we'll say module.exports equals the name of this function over here. Okay, and I'm going to save that, and then I can simply rerun it and see what's stored in here. And if I do that, and as you can see, input service is actually this function. So this is great because now over here, when we actually want to get input, we can just use this input service like this. And right now, this line of code should work, and we should see our input being some random number over here. Okay, so let's test that really quickly. So I'm going to run it again, and you see that our input is 17 this time. Okay, so this is how you can do that. Now I'm going to remove this. Hopefully you kind of remember this from now on. Okay, so now the first step is kind of done, right? Now let's move on and modularize this second piece over here. So I'm going to cut this part over here, and then I'm going to paste that into the wait service like this. And at the end, I'm going to say module.exports equals calculate wait, and then in this app.js file we can say const wait service equals require, and then wait service, and then over here instead of this calculate wait we can simply copy and paste this, and now this should also work. So we can test it one more time just to be sure. And it's definitely working, as you can tell. And now for this final piece over here, for sending the data, we can cut this function over here, and then go to our output service and simply type module.exports equals send data. And then as we did previously, we can come above, go const output service equals require, and then output service. And then we can simply replace the send data name with our output service. Okay, and let's try it one more time. I'm now going to remove this console log as well. And as you can see right now, our application is definitely working as it did the first time. However, our app.js file is much nicer, and it's much easier to actually figure out what's going on. Now you might notice something, like we had here a function that was called get input, right? But now it's just like input service, which is like really generic, and perhaps you can have multiple different methods in this input service. Same goes for this wait service. Like, what are we actually doing? Like, I have no idea. Like, maybe this wait service can calculate weights based on different properties, and maybe there are multiple methods involved in there, but we wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at this name over here. And the same thing happens over here. We had something like send data, which was pretty descriptive, but right now we just see output service. So there is this one way that you can actually expose a function from your module by typing module.exports and then making sure that that function is actually being set to this thing over here. However, you can be more explicit than that. So perhaps maybe we wanted to have another function, say get input via RPC or something, okay? And then the question is, how can we access this function in our app.js file, right? So one other thing you can do, apart from exporting a single function like this, is to actually export an object and then you can attach multiple functions to it. So we can say module.export is now actually an object, okay, and now this object can contain different functions. So we can say we'll have one function that is called getInput, and that is actually this getInput over here. So this is like key and this is the value, and then we'll have getInput via RPC, and that is also getInput via RPC like this. And now if I come back to this app.js and we actually console log the contents of our input service right now, what we should see is that we actually get back an object. So you see here that this input service now is an object, is a JSON, and this JSON contains two keys. So we have one key that is getInput and it points to a function, and we have another key that is getInput via RPC and it points to another function. So once you do that, then in this line 9 where we actually want to get input, we need to say something like input service and then dot and then choose whatever we want. And this IntelliSense from the VS Code actually already presents us with these two options. So we can say getInput, and that is a method. And now this should work the same as before, but as you can see, it is perhaps more self-descriptive and you actually know what method you're invoking on this actual service. So now if I actually rerun this, you see that the code still works the same. Alright, so now we can use this and actually go on and refactor our other two modules. So I'm going to simply get rid of this one because it was just there for an example. And even though we're like exporting an object, we can definitely export like an object with just one method. And you still see like the benefits of doing that over here. So in our wait service, we'll do the same. We'll say that module.export is actually an object, and we'll have one method over there. So method is going to be calculate weight, and it points to calculate weight that we already defined over here. So I'm going to get rid of this. And then in the app.js file, once we actually want to calculate the weight, we need to actually use this service and then use this calculate weight method, and then actually pass our inputs. Okay, and we can do the same for our output service. So if I come back here, and instead of using what we had previously, I'll say module.export is an object and it contains one method, so send data, and I'll remove this. And then I'll come back to this app.js file, and this output service I'll then go dot and then access this send data, and that's it. Okay, and now I can rerun it again and you see that it's definitely working. Okay, now what you can also do, you see this line over here, wait service dot calculate weight. Well, maybe this weight over here is redundant because we already know that this service is all about weights. So maybe we would prefer to have a method called simply calculate. And what we can do is, if you come back here, we don't need to rename this method over here. I mean, this one makes sense, but we can simply like create a new name over here and say, well, let's have a method that is going to be called calculate, and it will point to this function which is defined up above. And now if I save this, this won't work because this calculate weight doesn't exist anymore on this service. However, we now have this calculate method and we can access it as such. And just to confirm that that's definitely working, as you can tell, it is. Okay, now a couple of improvements. I mean, whenever you have the same name for like the key and the value pair, you can get rid of the second part. This is something that was introduced into JavaScript ES6. And then over here we had the same, so I can remove this as well. And I cannot remove here because we have different names. Okay, and guys, that's pretty much it. Like, this example was here to do two things. Like, one thing was to actually teach you how to use the require statements and to actually import different modules that you yourself have built. However, second goal of this example was to actually show you how code actually looks like if you actually use modules and you break your code into different files and sections, versus how it actually looks if you just like have one file and you do like all of your logic in that file. And I hope that you'll agree with me that this looks way nicer than what we had previously. Now you have two options over here. If your goal was to just learn how this require works and how you can actually write modules and how you can import them, I think we pretty much accomplished that right now, so you can perhaps stop watching and continue learning other things about Node.js. However, if you really are curious how this require works like behind the surface, if you will, then you can stick around, and in the following section of this video we'll actually learn more about require, like where does this module actually comes from. And if you remember, in my previous video I told you that it is kinda in the global object but not really, and now we are going to actually tackle that not really aspect, if you will. Alright, so if you have watched my previous video, we went through this Node.js documentation regarding this global object, and we went through a couple of things over here. We actually played a bit with dir name, file name, process, etc. And like when I clicked on this dir name, you may remember that I read this to you, like this variable may appear to be global but it is not. Same goes for file name, and actually a couple of more things. If I click on the exports, you see the same line over here. And if I come back here and go to like module, you see the same thing over here. And one more thing inside of this list that has the same line written for it is this require. Okay, so now the question is, like, if they're not stored in global, like how do we have access to them? And that is what we're going to see next. So in order for me to show you that, I need to create a new module. I need to do pretty much like some silly things. So let's say my module.js, and that is definitely not .js. Okay, and over here we need to do something funny. We need to make sure that Node.js breaks on the first line. Okay, so we can say, for example, like misspell something. So instead of like module, we can use modules.exports, and then let's try to export some string literal, say code worker, like this. And then inside of our app.js file, let's simply require it anywhere. So I'm going to say require / my module, like this. And then I'm going to restart this application. So now I'm going to type node app.js, and you see that we see this reference error that modules is not defined over here. However, something really interesting is over here. So when this error actually wants to point to us where it fails, you can see this caret symbol over here, it actually reveals to us something different. You see this part over here that we definitely didn't write ourselves, but it is there. So what's going on? During the runtime, Node.js will automatically wrap any code from any file with something like this. This is a thing called immediately invoked function expression, and all it does really, it takes some piece of code over here, which could be like several lines long, of course, and it makes sure that it is protected from the outside. Now, if you're new to JavaScript, you don't really need to worry about this too much, because in the ES6 we now have let and const, but like prior to this we actually had to use var for declaring variables, and they had different scope rules. Now, if you're curious about var, let, const, like the difference between them, I have a video in my ES6 course, and I'll simply link it up here so you can watch it if you're interested in. But for now, just like make a note that whenever you create a new file and you use Node.js, like whatever you write in that file will ultimately during the runtime get wrapped with a function like this. And this function over here, as you can see, it actually passes to us these 5 things that in this global documentation you can see that they may appear to be global but they are not, and that this is the reason why they appear to be global, because they actually get passed to your file via this function over here. And now, speaking of those 5 different things, we already tackled the dir name, the file name, the module, the require. We just didn't speak about these exports, and exports is like alias for module.exports. Like this is pretty much the same as exports. Now, because this exports is like an alias or like reference to this, you cannot really set it up to be something else, right? So remember this, like in the not previous video, but like few minutes ago, we talked about how you can do module.exports and then equal to some function, right? Like get input, if you remember, and that was all fine. However, you can't do something like exports equal get input, because like beneath the surface, exports is equal to like module.exports, if you will, right? Because there is this like reference between those two. So if you want to use exports, you can do something like exports dot get input equals get inputs. Like you can modify it in that way, but you cannot simply do it like this. Okay, so hopefully that is now clear, and that is pretty much it. So remember, like when you want to use require, you have several options. You can export an entire object, and then over here you can treat this object just like you would treat any other object in JavaScript. Or for example, you can do something like this, where you just want to expose one function. You can do it like this, then you don't need the object. And like for example, maybe you want to expose both the variable and the function, and you would do it in the same way, like Earth's gravity, and simply point to it. And then in the app.js, for example, over here you would be able to do something like Earth's gravity, and let me just escape this, is equal to wait service dot Earth gravity. And if I now rerun this example, you should see that we still have access to this Earth gravity, but also this method, of course. Okay guys, so thanks for watching this video. I hope it was useful and that you learned something. As always, if you like this video, please leave a like, because it helps with YouTube algorithm. And if you dislike this video, well, you can always leave the thumbs down in that situation. And if you really like this video and want to stay up to date with my videos, you can always subscribe so that you will get notifications. Although you would also need to click on that bell icon for the actual notifications. If you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video, where we're going to learn all about NPM and how you can actually install third-party modules. And spoiler alert, there are a ton of them, so stay tuned up for that.